Well, Jet Airways is all set to touch the skies once again. What will Jet 2.0 really look like? What will remain and what will go away? What does this also mean for an extremely competitive aviation space as far as India is concerned? To discuss all this and much more, I have with me the new CEO of Jet Airways, Sanjiv Kapoor. Sanjiv, first of all, congratulations on your appointment. Thank you so much for taking our time and joining us here on CNN News 18. Before we get talking about all the fine print, let's get the big question out of the way, which is when will Jet 2.0 begin its operations? When will we see the first flight?
Well, we expect to begin operations by October of this year. So by October, could be a little bit earlier. We are expecting to get our AOP, which is also known as the AOC, by the end of this month or early next month. It's a very complicated process. It's a long process. It's with the DGCA. We're in the final stages of the process. We will hope to have approving flight by the end of this month, following which the AOC will be granted. Once the AOC is granted, everything else goes into high gear, and we are obviously not just waiting for the AOC, but we're also planning for what comes after that. And if all goes according to our plan, which we are all fully committed to, by October we should have our first flights in the air.
Okay, that's good to have a timeline. So we're saying October by 2022, we should hopefully have the first flight out. A lot of consumers have a lot of nostalgia and sentiment attached with the brand Jet Airways. So if you could talk to us broadly about what will go away, what will remain, but what will change. So if you could give us a sense of a comparison between Jet 1.0 versus 2.0.
Well, one thing which will certainly not change is the brand. Jet Airways is much loved, much missed, and people can't wait for it to get back in the air again. What will also not change is the service, the warmth, the classiness that was associated with the brand. That will remain. What will also largely not change is the workforce. So we expect, as we grow, to hire majority Jet 1.0 employees. Of course, they'll have to reapply for the jobs because Jet 1.0 doesn't exist anymore. But we're fully committed. If all things are equal, the candidate from Jet 1.0, if they're equally qualified, will get the job. So we think that's the right thing to do. But again, I would request all of those who are formerly with Jet 1.0 to understand that we will be growing at a certain pace and we'll be absorbing good staff basis our growth plan. So not everybody and not everything can happen on day one. But our intent is to get back as many good staff from Jet 1.0 over time as possible.
Okay, that's something that I'll discuss with you in just a bit, but I want to begin with the various details now. Of course, the biggest concern is the fleet, the slots, and the routes. When Jet 1.0 was functioning, of course, it had a wide range of routes, the best fleet, and the slots as well. Where do conversations on those lines stand currently?
Well, we're talking actively to both the OEMs and also to lessors for our aircraft requirements. We are very clear that we don't want the short-term tactical stuff to drive the long-term strategy. So we're not going to just base our fleet and restart on what's available, but on what's best for us. So we have evaluated various aircraft type. We continue to evaluate. We have not made any decisions yet as to what is the order going to be for, or what is going to be our preferred type. There are good options out there. We are studying them all, and we will make a decision in the coming weeks. The AOC, or the proving flight, of course, is going to be in the Boeing 737 because that was the aircraft that we had operated earlier. And the Boeing 737 is very much in the running. It's a good aircraft. The MAX, we have no issues with it. But we're also going to be looking at the Airbus offerings, and we'll make a decision basis what works best for us in the long term.
Okay. Now let's get to the team and the employees. This, of course, has been one of the biggest concerns. What happens to employees of the previous Jet Airways? Right. So you said there could be some sort of a priority that could be given to them, but nothing is promised. So what does your hiring process currently look like? Are there certain accommodations that are being made for employees who were with Jet Airways previously?
Well, currently we have about 200 employees, and more than 2/3 of them are former Jet 1.0. So we've been hiring people as we basis our need pre-start. Most of the people we have are technical people, engineers. We also have people from flight ops, pilots. We have some cabin crew, etc. But going forward, we are going to be putting up a website which details all of our openings. Candidates are invited to apply, all qualified candidates from all backgrounds. But like I said, all else being equal, if there's a qualified candidate from Jet 1.0, that'll be our first preference.
Okay. Let's talk from the consumer point of view now. What will be offered to the consumer who will be taking the first few flights as far as Jet Airways are concerned? Because as I pointed out, a lot of high standards were set with the previous operations before things went downward. Are you planning to retain some sort of that sentiment and then build on, or will this be a completely different experience as far as consumers are concerned?
No, absolutely. We intend to build on what Jet 1.0 was famous for, which again was warmth, good service, classiness. Really, it was a loved airline. And we don't want to, we bought the airline, or we haven't, but the promoters bought the airline because of what it stood for. And we'd be foolish to dilute any of that. So service excellence, guest focus, employee focus, and just general warmth and doing the right thing for customers is going to be our focus. That's not going to change. In terms of the physical product, I think we'll retain certain elements. We may modify or modernize certain other elements. Time has passed since Jet 1.0 stopped operations. Like I like to say, we want to be a people-focused airline for the digital age. So we'll modernize the airline and what it stood for, but we're not going to change the heart or the essence of the airline.
Okay, interesting what you're saying. The heart will not be changed, but of course you would want to diversify where the new chapter goes. I also want to understand again from a consumer point of view, because this is the problems that we face with Jet 1.0, which was a very competitive pricing, lower air prices for the consumer, newer airlines coming in. This time around, what is the game plan as far as competitive pricing for the consumers are concerned?
Pricing is a function of demand and supply, and in markets or routes where there's oversupply, prices drop. Where there's less supply, prices increase, etc. We are planning a network, and we need to plan a network on a basis where we can cover our costs, and we don't want to necessarily just replicate what Jet 1.0 did, nor do we want to be a clone of what other airlines are doing. So we are developing a strategy which is going to be uniquely Jet, and it's going to allow us to prevail and succeed in the areas that we choose to compete in.
Okay, I have a couple of more questions, Sanjiv. I want to understand one, do you see an impact of the ongoing war as far as prices are concerned? Because we've seen how ATF prices also have been impacted. Is that a consideration that you're going to see by the time the final prices are stabilized?
Let's say fuel prices are a huge driver of fares. I mean, we cannot just simply raise fares and pass on the fuel prices completely because demand falls and then your revenue starts declining.
Sure.
But to some extent, whenever fuel prices go up, fares do go up, right? It's not a one-for-one, but fares do go up.
Correct.
And as long as fuel prices remain so high, fares will be on the higher side. But again, the market will tell us that, look, the fares are too high because we don't want to price at a level where people stop flying. But this is going to be a pressure, and we hope that the oil prices moderate, that measures are taken to ease the pain for airlines. Even before this latest oil price crisis, India has the highest aviation fuel prices in the world, the highest taxes in the world. I know the aviation ministry has been very keen and has been studying ways to put it under GST so that the tax burden can be reduced.
Correct.
So measures such as that will go a long way in helping us both manage our costs and keep fares in control.
Sanjiv, I also want to understand, where do you see Jet being positioned in the India aviation space? Because you've got Air India getting a new lifeline with the Tatas coming in. There's Akasa coming in, backed by Rakesh Jhunjhunwala. And then there's, of course, going to be Jet 2.0. And you've got the regular carriers of Indigo, SpiceJet and others. Where do you see Jet being positioned there?
We want to be positioned as the most loved, most customer-focused, nicest airline that is out there.
Okay, last question before I wrap up, Sanjiv. You've been a player with the aviation space before also. From then to now, what do you see as your biggest task?
The biggest task going forward is getting the airline back in the air as per our timelines, regaining customer confidence, and making the airline succeed in a very competitive market, devising a strategy and a business plan that works for us, and just focusing on getting things done. We are not going to be speaking about how many aircraft and how big the airline is going to be. Of course, we've got our plans, we've got our numbers, but we'd rather just put our heads down now and focus on getting the airline restarted, which is what we're all committed to, all 200 of us.
So, Sanjiv, you were speaking about the priority that could be given to former employees, but what about employees, those who haven't resigned? Do you have a plan, or do we have clarity about those?
That's a very good question, because we get asked that often on social media and elsewhere. See, Jet 1.0 doesn't exist anymore. Jet 1.0 went through a bankruptcy process, the NCLT process, and it has been bought by new shareholders and promoters, and is going to be revived as Jet 2.0. As part of that NCLT process, our balance sheet was largely cleaned up. Certain liabilities and conditions were put on the new owners. The liabilities are about $60 million worth of payables and dues have to be paid, which the new promoters will be paying. There was also a certain number of former staff that we were told we had to rehire. And in fact, the number was just a minimum of 50 Jet staff, Jet 1.0 staff. We're already well beyond that. And like I said, we're going to hire as many good Jet 1.0 staff as possible to get first preference. But in terms of those who didn't resign, that entity doesn't exist anymore. This is a new entity with the same brand and is getting a new AOC. And I would just encourage all the staff, rather than worry about the technicalities that we resigned or didn't resign, etc., to just apply. If you're good staff, we want you.
Okay. From the consumer point of view, the other concern has been what happens to refunds. Do we have clarity on that as well?
Yes, in fact, the NCLT process also defined what portion of the refunds the new ownership will have to pay. That is part of the $60 million liabilities that the new owners are responsible for. The NCLT has defined precisely, they've given certain formulas. Again, I want to be very clear, it is not the case that everybody is going to get 100% back, because the entity that failed is now defunct. This is a new ownership, new shareholding. And so it's a new entity for all purposes with the old brand and with some of the old assets. So as per the NCLT directives, we will refund partially whatever the NCLT has directed us, and that will be done once the AOP is in place. There's a timeline and schedule that has been defined, and we'll take care of that.
Okay. Sanjiv, of course, this has been another area of a lot of questions and debate on social media, which has been the funding around as far as this time around is concerned. Would you want to set the record straight?
Oh, absolutely. I think it should be known that Jet 2.0 is going to be very well funded. The initial funding that has been committed by the new promoters, the Jalan Kalra Consortium, is $180 million US. That is a large sum of money. Out of the $180 million, like I said, $60 million is going to be used to pay off previous liabilities as directed, as determined by the NCLT, and the remaining $120 million is to fund the new airline. And that is actually a very healthy sum of money. It is more than most airlines have started with in India. So we're not going to be starting on a shoestring. We're not going to be starting as a small-scale operator. At the same time, we know that we're in a marathon, not in a sprint. We're not going to bite off more than we can choose. But funding is not a constraint. Funding of $120 million to start an airline and to fund the initial operations is a very healthy sum, and I think we're going to be able to use those funds and really get our business plan in place, get the right aircraft, and start at the pace and scale and grow to the size that we need in order to be competitive in this market.
Okay, perfect. So that was Sanjiv Kapoor, CEO of Jet Airways, giving us an inside track of what possibly Jet 2.0 could look like. They're saying all hands on deck. If all goes well, then by October 2022, we could see the first flight of Jet Airways.